I never thought betrayal would come with fine wine and filet mignon. But there I was, sitting at the head of a long polished oak table in my parents' home. The kind of table reserved for celebrations. My father had spared no expense. Crystal glasses, candles, silverware I hadn't seen since Christmas 3 years ago. Everyone was there. Mom, my younger sister Claire dressed like she was headed to a Vogue interview. Her fiancé, a finance bro who hadn't blinked all dinner, our CFO, the head of marketing, even a few close family friends who had invested in our company over the years. Dad stood at the end of the table holding up a glass of red. "A toast," he said, voice smooth and commanding. I felt a small flicker of warmth in my chest. Maybe, just maybe, this was it. The moment he'd finally recognize what I had done, what I had built, our family business faced ruin, he said, eyes scanning the room. We were months, weeks from closing our doors, but thanks to hard work, creativity, and a bit of luck, we're thriving again. I smiled quietly. I remembered those months, the sleepless nights, the constant meetings with suppliers threatening to cut us off, the heavy silence of our pharmacy when customers stopped coming, the fear in our staff's eyes as ours were cut. But, Dad continued, there was someone who brought a new vision, someone who carried us through. My heart raced, my fingers tightened around my glass. This was it. To Claire, he said, turning to my sister with pride. Our new CEO. Applause, smiles, glasses raised. Claire beamed, pretending to be humble, her hand on Dad's arm like she'd actually earned it. I blinked. Wait. I stared at him. Surely, he misspoke. Maybe he was building up to something else. But no, he sat down like the matter was closed. Claire, I said, keeping my voice level. She wasn't even in the lab. She's never developed a single. Dad chuckled. Sweetheart, he said, waving a hand. You're good with formulas. You always have been, but leadership takes more than that. Claire has presence. She knows how to work a room. Mom smiled softly at me like I was a child who dropped her ice cream cone. Claire raised her glass toward me, eyes gleaming. And of course, she said. We couldn't have done it without Emily's help in R&D. She's brilliant with details. Absolutely, Dad nodded. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a crisp $100 bill. For your contribution, he said, placing it on the table beside my plate. I stared at it. $100 for creating the very drug that saved our company. For staying up nights in our basement lab, working with borrowed equipment and donated compounds. For formulating the antiviral treatment that skyrocketed our reputation and led to the $200 million valuation we had just secured from a pharmaceutical conglomerate. I didn't say anything. I just folded the bill, tucked it into my purse, and finished my glass of wine because I knew something none of them did. The formula they had scaled. It wasn't the final version. They had patented an early model, one I had written in desperation during the height of our financial crisis. The real version, the perfected one, still sat in my encrypted files, the one that improved efficacy by 23% with fewer side effects. The one I hadn't uploaded to the shared company system, they hadn't even noticed the difference because no one ever looks at the girl in the lab coat. I smiled politely throughout the rest of dinner. I even clapped when Claire stood up and gave her little CEO acceptance speech full of vague promises and buzzwords she barely understood. Synergy, global expansion, customer-first innovation. It was like watching a TED Talk written by ChatGPT and sponsored by champagne. When dessert was served, Dad clinked his glass again. This is a proud day for the Caldwell family, he said. We have a future again. I nodded softly. Yes, we did. But it wouldn't be the one they expected. That night, I drove home in silence. My hands gripped the wheel, knuckles pale. I passed the pharmacy, the lights still glowing, the new sign gleaming. Caldwell Remedies, a family tradition. I built that name back up from the ashes. And they handed it to someone who didn't know a compound from a calculator. The next morning, I showed up to work as usual. No fanfare, no drama, just my badge, my coffee, and the cold white hallway that led to my lab. But something was different. Everyone was quiet. And then I saw the memo taped to the door of my office. Effective immediately, Emily Caldwell will transition into a support role under the R&D department, reporting directly to Claire Caldwell, CEO. I read it twice. Then I opened the door. My office had been cleared. My desk was gone. My nameplate removed. In its place was a small cubicle outside the lab, wedged between supply storage and the janitor's closet. I stood there for a moment, breathing, processing. And then I smiled because they had no idea what was coming next. I didn't react. I didn't storm into Claire's office demanding answers. I didn't ask Dad why the promotion I'd earned was handed to someone who didn't even know how to run a clinical trial. I didn't even mention the $100 bill he'd tossed at me like I was some part-time intern. Instead, I took my new cubicle, the one with flickering lights and no heating, and decorated it with quiet purpose. A photo of the original formula notes. My own name, Emily Caldwell, lead researcher, scrolled on a sticky note and taped where my nameplate should have been. A coffee mug that read, "Be careful. This scientist bites." And then I got to work. Because if they thought a new title in a corner cubicle could erase my contribution, they were underestimating the one thing they never understood. I don't fight with words. I fight with results. For the first week, I stayed invisible. Claire strutted through the hallways like she was born to lead, rehearsing slogans for the upcoming investor press conference. "Innovation is in our blood," she'd say with a practiced smile. While I sat in silence a few feet away, documenting the daily stability tests from my latest version of the drug, the funny thing was most people still came to me for real answers. "Emily, does this lab report look off? Hey, can you recheck the efficacy data? I don't think Claire knows the new FDA submission deadline. Do you?" I'd answer quietly, always polite, never pushing back. Because I knew something none of them did. Leadership isn't about the title on your door. It's about what happens when everything starts falling apart and everyone still looks to you. 2 weeks after Claire took over, the cracks began to show. First, a shipment of the current drug formulation was returned from one of our major hospital clients in New York. Side effects were reported. Something about inconsistencies in the active compound blend. Claire brushed it off during the morning briefing. "Probably just an error in transport," she said, adjusting her overpriced blazer. "We'll fix it. No need to panic." But I already knew it wasn't a shipping error. I had warned the team months ago that the early formula, the one Claire had rushed through FDA approval to impress Dad, was unstable at extreme temperatures, but no one had listened. Then came the Boston order, one of our oldest clients. Same issue. This time, they pulled the plug entirely. Claire called an emergency meeting with the board. I wasn't invited, of course, but I sat near enough to hear muffled voices through the glass walls, frantic, defensive, uncertain. When she finally emerged, she was pale, and for the first time, I saw it. The panic behind her perfect posture. That same afternoon, our lead chemist resigned. "I can't work under someone who doesn't know how the compound she's selling actually functions," he told me before walking out. I didn't argue, I just nodded. Then I pulled up the original notes on my private drive. The real version of the drug. The one they didn't even know existed. The one I had improved after months of quiet trials, late-night lab sessions, and consultations with researchers around the world. I hadn't uploaded it to Caldwell's system. Not because I was holding a grudge, but because I knew what would happen if Claire got her hands on it. She would stamp her name on my work again. Sell it without understanding it, destroy it. No, this time I'd do it right. That night, I called 2 people I trusted. Dr. Harris, my old professor and mentor, now a senior consultant for half the major biotech companies in the country, and Raj Patel, a regulatory strategist who once helped my uncle sell his diagnostics patent to a Fortune 100 firm. We met at a quiet bistro 2 towns over. They didn't ask why I wanted to meet. They both knew something was wrong the moment they saw my face. I laid it out, calm, clear, detailed. I showed them the updated version of the drug, the lab results, the documented trials, the data sets they knew couldn't be faked. This isn't just better, Raj said, eyes scanning the printouts. This is revolutionary. Dr. Harris looked at me over his glasses. Does your family know you have this? I shook my head. They think they already won, I said simply. And then I smiled for the first time in weeks. Let them keep thinking that. We talked for hours planning, refining, strategizing. I wouldn't go to war with Claire or my father. That's not my style. Instead, teams were overworked and confused. Our tech partners started pulling back. Client meetings turned tense. Everyone whispered the same question behind closed doors. Where is the person who actually knows what's going on? The answer, of course, was sitting at a cramped desk between the mop closet and the janitor's break room. Me. I kept my head down, logging hours no one noticed. I didn't correct Claire when she missed our clinical trial data in her company-wide email. I didn't speak up when she promised an impossible launch timeline to an investor. Because it wasn't my job to fix her mistakes anymore. It was my job to build something better. And quietly, I did. At night, I worked on a new project. I called it Project Alpha, Greek for truth. It wasn't just a better version of the drug. It was a full redesign. Stronger absorption rates, increased temperature stability, better results across 3 separate control groups. I filed for the provisional patent under my own name and housed the development under a new LLC, CallBios. No one at Caldwell knew. I had used a personal laptop, paid for lab access through a friend at a nearby university. Every paper trail was clean, and then came the opportunity I'd been waiting for. One of our former distributors, an old friend named Evan, who had left after Claire's promotion, called me out of the blue. Emily, he said, I've been watching what's happening at Caldwell. It's not good. There's talk of pulling funding entirely. I didn't respond immediately. I know you, he added after a moment. You're not the type to just sit there while the house burns down. I smiled. You're right. Then I sent him a file, just a teaser. Early data, no formulas, just enough to start a conversation. 24 hours later, I was sitting across from him at a quiet cafe, sliding a manila envelope across the table. Evan skimmed the executive summary of Althea, his brow rising with each page. This is real? I nodded. He let out a low whistle. You're going to crush them. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to because for the first time in my life, I wasn't looking for validation. I was preparing to make my move. 3 days later, Evan introduced me to a group of angel investors, former biotech execs who had walked away from the industry and were now hunting for the next big thing. And unlike my father, they didn't care what my last name was. They cared about results. I had those. Within a week, I had my first offer, a $5 million seed investment. No family strings, no corporate overlords, just me, my formula, and full creative control. When the paperwork arrived, I signed it in my tiny cubicle, surrounded by half-used pipette boxes and stale vending machine coffee. The same day, Claire scheduled an all-hands meeting. The company is facing challenges, she began, pacing the stage like she was giving a TED Talk. But with focus, we'll bounce back. She didn't even notice I wasn't listening. I was looking at the logo on the wall behind her. Caldwell Pharmaceuticals, a name that once meant family, loyalty, legacy. Now it meant arrogance, blindness, waste. As the applause ended, Claire smiled and said, "And don't worry, R&D is in great hands with my sister working behind the scenes." Everyone clapped. I didn't because by then I had already booked a one-way ticket to Boston. That evening, I packed up my apartment. No goodbyes, no confrontation. I left behind the lab coat with the Caldwell name embroidered on it, hanging on a hook in the bathroom. The next morning, I was gone. By the time the team noticed I hadn't shown up, I was already sitting in a co-working space on the other side of the country, finalizing the next version of the formula with my new team. Real scientists, real analysts, real leadership, people who saw me, people who trusted me. And when we launched our preclinical trials 6 weeks later, the early buzz started rolling in. The most promising innovation in antiviral therapy in a decade. CallBio's solutions is quietly disrupting the pharmaceutical industry. And my favorite, sources say the founder is a former employee of Caldwell Pharmaceuticals. Rumors of internal mismanagement continue. I didn't gloat. I didn't post cryptic quotes or LinkedIn jabs. I just kept building because while they were still trying to fix the old foundation, I was already living in the future. 2 months. That's how long it took before Caldwell Pharmaceuticals started publicly cracking. It began with whispers. Clients who didn't renew contracts, suppliers who demanded payments up front instead of billing later. Claire tried to mask it, of course. She tightened the PR spin, arranged glossy interviews, and posted motivational quotes on LinkedIn about resilience during uncertain times. But resilience doesn't fix science. And science was where I had always lived. Without someone maintaining the formula, the manufacturing pipeline began slipping. A bad batch went out to a major hospital in Chicago, resulting in side effects severe enough to make headlines. Claire issued a statement denying liability. But internally, she panicked. I heard about it all from Nora, my former assistant, who still worked there, and texted me updates and code. Every message started with emojis. A fire, a microscope, a red flag, then a sentence. Claire just fired Paul. He questioned her timeline again. They rehired the compliance guy you warned them about. FDA audit incoming. Investor pullout confirmed. Everyone is nervous. You were right. Meanwhile, CallBios was gaining traction. We had secured a development grant from a government health agency. A respected biotech news outlet featured us in their top 10 startups to watch. Our preclinical trials were showing better efficacy than any similar treatment on the market. And still, I stayed silent. Not once did I comment on the downfall of my family's company. Not when a viral Reddit thread titled, "My boss Claire is a pharmaceutical disaster," started trending in industry circles. Not when Dad went on television to reassure investors and ended up walking off mid-inter when the host brought up CallBio. Not even when I received an anonymous package with a single sticky note inside. "We need you. Please come back." I knew it was from Mom. Still, I didn't respond because going back would have meant stepping into the same cage they built for me. The cage labeled good with formulas. Instead, I kept building the empire they never believed I could. Then, on a gray Tuesday afternoon in October, the real blow hit. A pharmaceutical giant we had quietly partnered with, Hollander and Bloom, announced an exclusive license deal for our Althea formula. The press release was short, clean, and devastating. H&B to distribute revolutionary antiviral drug developed by CallBios. Estimated $120 million deal projected to replace older generation treatments within 12 months. Caldwell's stock dropped 32% before lunch. I watched it happen from my glass-walled office, sipping tea, surrounded by a team that actually saw me for who I was. At 4:16 p.m., my phone buzzed, a number I hadn't seen in over a year. Dad. I didn't answer. Then another Claire, followed by a short email. "Emily, please, we need to talk." Claire. I stared at it for a moment, not because I was unsure, but because I realized something. They still didn't get it. They thought they needed my mind, my work, my hands on the keyboard, fixing the mess. But what they really needed, integrity, vision, leadership. Things you can't fake with designer suits or boardroom titles. I closed the email and forwarded it to my legal team just in case. The next day, Claire showed up at the Call Bios Solutions office unannounced. My assistant buzzed me. "There's a woman here. Says she's your sister." I didn't react. "Tell her I'm unavailable." There was a long pause. "She's crying." I looked at the city skyline outside my window, lights flickering on as dusk approached. I thought of that dinner a year ago, the $100 bill, Dad's smug toast, Claire's smile. And I said calmly, "Send her away." My assistant hesitated, then replied, "Yes, ma'am." The next time I saw Claire, she was on the cover of Business Insight Weekly under the headline, "From Legacy to Liability, How Caldwell Pharma Lost the Cure." I didn't buy the magazine. I didn't need to because I was already writing my own story. And the ending would be mine to choose. I never planned to destroy them. That's what people don't understand. It was never about revenge. All I ever wanted was to be part of what I helped save, to be seen, valued. But when you're treated like you're replaceable for long enough, you stop trying to be included. You build something of your own. By November, Call Bios Solutions was no longer a whisper in biotech circles. It was the conversation. Our drug alpha had completed phase 1 trials with record-breaking results. The licensing deal with Hollander and Bloom had finalized. Our valuation had skyrocketed. I was in back-to-back meetings with partners from Europe, Asia, and the US, wanting in on the next round. Meanwhile, Caldwell Pharmaceuticals was bleeding. It started with their stock price. It dropped 32% the day our licensing deal went public. Within days, 3 of their biggest clients pulled out. Then came the layoffs. Quiet at first, then impossible to ignore. Half the R&D team was let go. 2 senior executives resigned. And then the FDA announced an investigation into discrepancies in their manufacturing reports. Apparently, Claire had tried to commission a new version of the drug, hoping to compete with Althea. But she didn't have the formula. Only I did. I hadn't uploaded the final build into Caldwell's system. What she did have was my outdated draft, the unstable version I'd written in desperation months before. And when they tried to scale it, it collapsed hard. Clinical failures, adverse events, supply chain chaos. It wasn't just embarrassing, it was catastrophic. By December, the board forced Claire to resign. Dad tried to save face, stepping back in as interim CEO, but the damage was done. Caldwell Pharma was no longer a contender. It was a cautionary tale. I watched from afar, silent. I didn't celebrate. I didn't post a thing online. I didn't even mention it to my team, because it wasn't about them anymore. It was about me. About finally stepping out from under a shadow that had stolen my work, my worth, and nearly my sanity. By January, Call Bios had expanded to a full-fledged research hub with 3 new hires and a second round of funding lined up. I had a corner office overlooking the river, a lab that felt alive with discovery, and, for the first time in my life, a sense of peace. Then, one evening as I was leaving, I found a letter slipped under my office door. Handwritten. The ink smudged like it had been rushed. "Emily, we made mistakes. I made mistakes. Please, before everything falls apart, help us. Come home. Love, Mom." I stood there for a long moment, the paper trembling in my hand. Home. That word used to mean something. But now? My home was here. With the people who believed in me before the world did. With the formula that was mine, finally carrying my name. With the future I had built from scratch. I folded the letter carefully, slid it into my desk drawer, and turned off the light. Because the truth is, I was never coming back. And this time, they'd have to live with the fact that the girl in the lab coat was the one who rewrote the family legacy.